Teresa, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my December wrap-up. I didn't read terribly much towards the end of the year. For like the first 2 weeks I kind of was a bit in a reading slump and I really didn't care to read anything. I was quite busy with like exams and stuff and I just like also didn't want to read. I don't know why. But anyway, things changed a little bit for the second half and altogether ended up I think reading 6 books this month, which isn't terrible but it's also not good. But anyway, let's just dive into it, shall we? Finishing in December was The ThreeBody Problem by Cixin Liu, the first book in this trilogy, I believe it is. This is a very heavy sci-fi book and it's really difficult to kind of explain what it's about, but I will try my best. The book is set both in the 1960s in China during the Cultural Revolution, where we follow a woman that has been kind of shunned by her peers because she's considered to be reactionary, but because she is good at physics, and particularly astrophysics, she gets put into this Red Coast base that is apparently doing some sort of radio technology thing where they're trying to intercept intelligence from the US. At least that is what she believed that they're up to. And then the book kind of jumps from there to the present, or like the near future present-ish, where we follow the scientist called Wang Miao, and he's asked by the police to investigate a science group because there's something going on and he's really unsure of what's happening. He's like, no, I don't want to deal with this. But he finds out that several scientists, renowned scientists, have recently been committing suicide, and like that is somehow linked to this whole thing. And it gets really weird when he feels like he's being drawn into this whole thing. A large portion of the book is centered around this virtual reality game called ThreeBody, where the players are asked to participate in sort of the rebuilding of a society or a civilization that is constantly being destroyed by natural disasters, and their task is basically to figure out like what is the sort of algorithm that runs this universe and how can it be predicted and how can it be sort of used to build a viable civilization. Now that sounds like the book is all over the place, and it kind of is. It's really hard to follow at times, and especially because it's so heavy on the science. Like honestly, there's sometimes pages and pages and pages of scientific descriptions that are way out of my league, like in terms of scientific knowledge and stuff. Like I am a complete noob, so sometimes it was a little hard to read. At the end of the day though, I was positively surprised by how much I ended up enjoying it. The sciencey parts of it didn't end up taking me too much out of the story, and I felt like they really enhanced everything and made it seem much more realistic and like true to our life. Like I don't know what portion of this is science fiction and what is actual science, which people who know more about science would probably find more easy to distinguish for them. So the scope of this book is enormous, and so it feels like you're kind of lost at times, but at the end of the day I still thought it was really enjoyable, really fun to read, really almost educational in a way. I just was so hooked to the mystery. Like I just wanted to know what was happening to the scientists, what the role of the game was, like how does the game work, what does it even matter, like all that kind of stuff. And I was so into it, and somehow, like I don't even know why, but like I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I really recommend checking it out if you're not too, you know, particular about necessarily wanting to understand every single scientific thing that they talk about. You know, maybe you're that good at science that you will, but like if you don't mind being left in the dark just a little bit at times, I do recommend checking this one out, especially because you can still appreciate the story without fully understanding the science, which I think was a really, really nice part about it. Then I finally finished the 7 Reach trilogy and read Acceptance by Jeff Vandermeer. As I already mentioned, this is book 3 in the series that centers around Area X, and I've talked about the series so many times on my channel that I don't want to repeat the plot again. But to suffice it to say, this book fell pretty flat for me. I talked about it in my most disappointing reads of 2017, no. Getting ahead of yourself here. And I ended up just giving this book 2 stars because nothing was answered. It was all over the place. It seemed like, honestly, the author himself had no idea what Area X even was, and I really would have wanted some more answers than what we were given, and yeah, 2 stars. Don't read the sequels, basically. Then I read a non-fiction book, The Political Thought of Mao Zedong by Mao Zedong, and some commentary by Stuart Schramm. This is basically just a collection of sort of essays and speeches and stuff just in general, even poems that Mao Zedong has written during his life. Obviously he was a very famous political figure that basically founded the Republic, the People's Republic of China, and he's one of the most important figures in Chinese history. I quite enjoyed this collection of his texts. I didn't read all of them because not all of them felt relevant to me personally. Like, none of them are relevant to me personally, but none of them felt like some were repetitive, and I kind of just read them with the purpose of better understanding him and his sort of policies and all that stuff and his ideology. I find it very interesting because, I feel like from the Western perspective, he's a very negative figure in Chinese history, whereas from the Chinese perspective, a lot of people actually still consider him a hero, basically, and someone that, he united the country, and politicians still refer back to him and try to, reuse some of his ideas and refer back to him in their speeches and things like that. So he's definitely a very important figure that is kind of controversial in some of his actions, or many of his actions, actually. And I find it so interesting because some of his theories, to me, seem like they would make sense in theory. Like, I feel like that's a lot of the times that's the case with theories. Like, oh, that could work. Like, this thing and that, like, okay, why not? It could work. Like, for example, I mean, there are passages in some of his texts or speeches or whatever that where he says, like, he encourages criticism of the Communist Party. So, like, yeah, that would be a great idea, right? Like, what authoritarian leader kind of encourages criticism? But hold on, the next line literally goes something like, not literally, but kind of goes something like, oh yeah, because, the Communist Party needs criticism to sharpen itself against, and like, the wrong opinions only can make us stronger, and things like that. So essentially from the get-go he goes, we want criticism, but your criticism is automatically wrong. So, no, that's not that great again. Not to get too politically, or sorry, but like, I really find this really interesting. But for example, he was actually very much in favor of treating women and men equally, which for his time, especially in a country as China, is like super progressive. Granted, he wanted them to be equal so that women could also do more work and become soldiers, which they weren't allowed at the time. But still, like, there's, still a positive thing to saying women and men are equal. You should treat your women better. Women should be able to decide who to marry and stuff like that. Like, yeah, that's great, Like, he's not 100% bad, I think, even from a Western perspective. So anyway, that was very interesting. At the end of the day. And I really did enjoy it quite a lot. The next book, unfortunately, was one that I DNF'd, and that is Die Wand by Marlene Haushofer. This is an Austrian classic that had been recommended to me many times from my grandmother. This used to be her copy, and she lent it to me like years and years ago, and I really, really wanted to read it because she loved it, she gave it to me, and unfortunately she passed away 2 years ago, so like, it kind of felt like I just like wanted to read this book and kind of have, I don't think that she had like a particularly strong relationship with it, but I still wanted to at least give it a chance and like hopefully enjoy it, but I really, really didn't. The book is super fucking boring. It is so tedious. I do not understand the appeal. This book was written in 1968, and it follows a woman that goes to a cabin in the woods with some of her friends, I think, and then her friends like leave for some errand or something, and she's alone by herself in this little hut, and then she realizes that she's kind of alone in the world, actually, because a wall, an invisible see-through, not invisible, like a see-through wall has appeared kind of around the cabin, like not exactly around it, but like there's an area, there's a cabin, there's like a woods and fields area that's actually quite large, and then around that is an invisible wall that cannot be crossed, and somehow she just knows that everybody else in the world has died. That is the premise of the book, and also its entire plot, because literally fucking nothing happens at all. I read, I think, about half of it, and all she does is describe to you what she does on a daily basis, which is basically feed the animals that are with her there. Like, she has a cow, a dog, and a cat, and some other animals, and like, she goes and finds berries in the woods, and she builds like this and that, and she prepares stuff for the winter time, and like that is literally all she does all day, every day, and nothing ever happens. And my boyfriend read this book in school, and I asked him to spoil it for me, like, because I wanted to know, like, does anything ever happen? And then he goes like, yeah, okay, this will spoil it, skip ahead if you want to read this book. But at some point, a guy appears out of nowhere. We don't know where he's from, because she, I think, went around the entire area, and like she never met anyone. But a guy appears, and he kills her cow, and then he leaves again. And then she just continues to do whatever she did before then, and I'm like, what the actual fuck? I'm really sorry, this book was terrible. I like did not want to finish it. I feel like there are sometimes a few like kind of feminist, second wave feminists, is that second wave feminists in the 60s? I think, messages that were quite nice, I guess, and if you read it at the time, maybe they're like, oh my god, this is scandalous. Like, you know, she cut her hair, and she mentions how like her figure isn't like womanly anymore because, you know, she's doing a lot of hard work and she doesn't care about how she looks anymore. She's like really wiry and slim and fit, because obviously she also doesn't have a ton of food and stuff. So like, yes, I guess there's some underlying positive messages in that regard, but the story is just, how is this book like over 200 pages long? How can you write this much nothing? I just don't understand. The next book I read, fortunately, was a lot better, and that was The Golem and the Genie by Helene Wecker. This book took me completely by surprise because I barely heard anyone talk about it. I honestly don't even know why I bought it, because I have no idea who recommended it to me, honestly. This book is sort of a fantastical historical fiction novel, and it's set in the year 1899 in New York, and we follow both a golem and a genie. A golem, if you didn't know, is a creature made of clay, and in this case the woman Chava is created for a master to be his wife, and on the voyage from Poland, I believe, yeah, her master, just after awakening her to life, passes away. So she's masterless and she ends up in New York. And the genie is awakened out of his flask by an impoverished tinsmith. And he takes him on sort of as a helper in his blacksmith shop. And both of them are kind of stranded in New York. Both of them are immigrants basically to a foreign, strange city, and they don't know really how to handle it. The genie comes from, I think, an Arabian country, and the golem is obviously has just been born basically, so she has like no real like life experiences to draw upon and how to handle the situation. But fortunately both of them end up having a sort of human friend and someone who helps them sort of settle in and who knows their secret and who helps them both conceal that and also kind of handle life in 1899 New York. The interesting thing about this book is that there's basically no plot, but in this one it really doesn't matter because it's such a character-driven story and it deals with so many interesting subjects, such as the immigration to New York, and such as the different cultural backgrounds that are actually present in New York at the time. There's like actual, I don't know, I've never been to New York, so I don't know how it looks like today, but in this book it's described to have like these sort of boroughs that belong to different cultures, so like different immigrants from different countries, and they're kind of all their own little sub-community within the city. Chava the Golem's friend basically is a Jewish rabbi, so we have the whole Jewish culture there, and Ahmad, Genie, is sort of submerged in this sort of Syrian culture there. So all those things are present in the book and just give it such a rich cultural background, because with these sort of two opposing things, sort of two different cultures that don't necessarily get along with one another. And the same is kind of true for the golem and the genie, because when they meet, they realize that they basically have nothing in common except for the fact that they're both immigrants and that they're both non-human. In their natures, however, they're very, very different. For example, the golem has been created to be a submissive slave, essentially, to a master. Her every instinct is telling her to sort of fulfill other people's wishes and to be of use and to be submissive and also to be sort of non-intrusive and very quiet, kind of shy, and very worried about being potentially discovered and that discovery potentially harming other people. The genie, on the other hand, is very, very different. Before he was captured by a wizard and put into this flask, he was by himself. He was like roaming the desert and like doing whatever he pleased and like sleeping with women left and right, and like he still has that very much this sort of idea of I can do whatever I want, I don't care about the consequences, I want to experience things, I want to live life to the fullest, and they both clash kind of in that sense in their natures, but then come together and like realize like, oh, maybe I should be a little bit more like that, because this isn't working out really, because Chava is very much sort of repressed and kind of forced to live a life of very much discomfort and very an unfulfilled life basically, whereas the genie realizes that his actions do have consequences and that do affect others and he can harm people, and that maybe that's also not the right way to go about living. Overall, I give this book 4 stars. It was really good, even though it's quite long, over 600 pages. I read it fairly quickly because I couldn't put it down. I really wanted to know more about these characters, and I'm so glad that a sequel is coming out in 2018. I'm literally like living for it, I swear. The reason I didn't give it 5 stars is just because the ending feels a little bit out of character for everyone involved and like a little bit off, just sort of. But overall, I really enjoyed it, and honestly, if you have not read it, definitely do. Second to last, I read The Shock of the Fall by Nathan Filer. This is a, I guess, I'm not sure if it's a YA contemporary. It feels like a YA contemporary. Basically, we follow this boy whose brother that suffered with Down syndrome has passed away when he was just 12 years old, and the boy himself was 9. It is about the little boy dealing with the death of his brother that he feels responsible for, and then also his subsequent descent into mental illness, specifically schizophrenia. This book gets a lot of praise everywhere, and I kind of see why, because I guess it deals with these issues quite well, but this is again a novel with very little plot where it didn't really work for me. It took me a while to get into it, it took me a while to even get to care about the characters, and I didn't feel like this was anything revelatory, honestly. I don't think that this book brings any new things to the table or necessarily taught me anything, be it about grief or dealing with death or about mental illness and how that can affect people. I just felt like this was sort of mediocre, and like maybe if you are very unaware of like mental illness and things like that, this would be a little bit more interesting to you, but to me, I just like I kept thinking like I don't understand the point of the book, like I don't see a point to it necessarily, and I think I ended up giving it 2 or 3 stars, I don't know right now. And the final book was actually one I listened to an audiobook, and that is What Happened by Hillary Rodham Clinton. This book came out, I think, in 2017, and it basically just is an account of Hillary's sort of reaction to the election, I guess, and also like her before the election and after, and it talks about a lot of different things. I haven't given the book a rating yet because I haven't technically finished it. I think I need like, I have like 30 minutes left or so of the audiobook, but it's the 31st of December, so I still have time to finish it, but I wanted to film the video first. I did find it very interesting, some parts of it. I especially like the parts where she talked about what it meant to be a woman in politics, because I think that's still a whole other thing than just like being a woman in society, is being a woman in politics. You're definitely exposed to a lot more criticisms. I also liked kind of the parts where she talked about her personal life a little bit more. I didn't care so much about her policies because they don't necessarily affect me directly. They felt a little bit too in-depth for me personally, because I just don't care in that much detail. And I also felt like sometimes she was getting a little bit repetitive, especially when talking about the whole email situation and how it felt like she was just like turning blame away from herself and being like, yeah, these people did something wrong, and these people also did something wrong, and these too. And then she will quickly mention that, like, oh yeah, I made a mistake, but they apologized, so let's move on from that. But let's just continue talking about these other people that did something wrong. This way of like sort of apologizing, but not really, and like pushing blame on others felt a little bit weird to me, and I'm not a big fan of that. But I do think overall it was kind of interesting to get this insight and like hear her thoughts on the election and what she personally felt went wrong. And while it is a little bit lengthy, I would say, I think it could have been cut by like half almost. I still think that it's a very interesting book, and it's insightful and educational if you want to hear more, learn more about Hillary Rodham Clinton. And I do recommend especially like the first third of it, because I think that's like the part where she talks about like the role of women in politics, which I personally enjoyed the most. And that is it for everything that I read and listened to in December of 2017. Let me know, you guys, if you've read any of these books that I talked about today and what you thought of them. And also check out some videos that I did in the previous time. I just did a lot of wrapping up 2017 videos, so if you're interested in that, do it. Watch them. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you very soon with another video. Have a lovely week. Bye!